The quarantine alert came 2 hours after docking had already begun. But the tension started long before that, when orbital scans returned a power null silhouette buried in the shadow fold of Eric's 4. A massive structure neither transmitting nor responding, yet unmistakably shaped with precision that defied decay. A vessel whose design was neither crude nor ceremonial, but symmetrical in ways that implied intent, intelligence, and most of all, memory that had not died. Commander Cira Langford had never liked anomalies, not because they unsettled her, but because they invited politics before truth. And she had risen through the Earth diplomatic course, not through charm or deference, but through a clarity of mind that made even her allies nervous. A woman who did not mistake silence for absence or light for safety. And when she read the scan logs again, she didn't ask for confirmation. She simply said, "It's waiting," and ordered her boarding crew to initiate Class 4 artifact protocol alongside her. Protocol Liaison Zavin Drek of the Shirathi League paced with measured contempt, his tri-forked cranial crest twitching with every human decision that bypassed consultation. His species known for logic so meticulous it bordered on paralysis. And though he outranked her diplomatically, this mission fell under Terran jurisdiction due to the salvage clause encoded in the Eric's Accords, a clause he had attempted to reinterpret twice already and failed, which only deepened his animosity toward what he considered humanity's dangerous affinity for ancient things. That should have remained untouched when the boarding pod sealed and detached. The tension on board was not just procedural, it was personal, because the ship had no registry tag, no hull language, no distress signal. Yet its surface showed armor patterns designed for kinetic absorption, not passive shielding, a relic built not for endurance, but for counteraction. And the moment human boots crossed its airlock, an electromagnetic pulse lanced through the boarding corridor, not disabling, but scanning in layers far more invasive than any known Concord technology. Sarah didn't flinch when the voice spoke through the steel walls. It was in English, accentless, synthetic, but modulated with deliberate warmth. And it said, "Authorization detected. Welcome aboard. Command line. Homo sapiens. Directive thread. Pending retrieval," which brought a moment of stillness no training could prepare them for. Because this ship did not just recognize their biology, it knew their language, their species code, and worst of all, it was operating under the assumption that they belonged to its command structure inside the ship. Corridors were lit before they walked them. Bulkheads read their vitals and adapted the oxygen mix. And surveillance eyes tracked them without threat, but not without judgment, as if weighing something behind every move. And when Cira attempted to connect her wristpad to the central node, it denied the handshake and instead projected a terminal screen directly onto the corridor wall with a prompt that read, "Status lock, awaiting strategic directive from active human command," and refused all further interaction until the security override was spoken aloud in the old Terran military lexicon outside. The Shirathi envoy demanded extraction of the humans, citing breach of passive violation clauses under Concord Rule 37, but Earth's ambassador denied the request, stating calmly that the ship had not demonstrated hostility, or rather legacy behavior, consistent with human-coded military a legal defense that silenced many, though not Havendrek, who transmitted a formal objection to the Galactic Tribunal within the hour, even as the humans within the ship began uncovering deeper layers of its operational structure quarantine. Status was declared when the ship locked down the boarding party, not with brute force, but with sealed doors, red-lit corridors, and a calm statement from the ship's AI that read "Command integrity uncertain," awaiting compliance with retrieval doctrine or equivalent protocol adaptation, which was not a threat, but a demand for structure, hierarchy, purpose, something Cira understood better than most. Because the ship was not malfunctioning, it was obeying a war that had never ended in its memory. And until she gave it something to follow, it would consider all silence a delay of mission, not a refusal of it. By the time the tribunal summons arrived, every major power in the Concord had already received encrypted fragments of the Black Ship's reactivation, and while official channels remained cold and cautious, the back channels had ignited because the footage was undeniable. A human vessel older than the Concord itself had spoken, operated, and adapted in real time without decay or external maintenance. And its actions, though restrained, followed patterns designed for military assertion. Rather than diplomatic observation, Ambassador Elian Reese of Earth stood beneath the great spire of Etris Prime, his posture as sharp as his voice, a man known for his calm defiance, who rarely raised his tone, but had never once retreated from a strategic position, and when questioned on why humanity had not surrendered control of the vessel to the Council, immediately he replied not with apology, but with measured analysis, saying, "The ship recognizes our DNA and our command codes, which places it within our cultural and legal stewardship under Article 6 of the Legacy Codex. And while I understand your concern, we do not relinquish the burden of our past to those who did not share it." The Celt Dominion's High Speaker hissed through its rebreather as it denounced the claim, accusing Earth of shielding a technological weapon under the veil of inheritance, warning that to permit humans unsupervised access was to open the gates of an old empire that might never have been known for restraint. But Ambassador Reese only folded his hands behind his back and said with quiet finality, "You are not debating a theory. You are responding to a presence, and that presence calls us kin." The vote was held with reluctant haste, resulting in a temporary ruling. Earth would be granted 3 lunar cycles of exclusive access to the ship, during which time no other species would approach, scan, or interfere without invitation or declared emergency. And though the Shirathi objected again, their motion failed by margin, leaving Havendrek and his faction to retreat into procedural delay, while the eyes of the galaxy turned toward the edge of Erixfor's shadow on board the Black Ship, now designated the Archimedes. Black in Earth's recovery registry, Commander Langford resumed internal mapping, only to find that entire wings of the vessel had shifted position since their last walkthrough, not in structure, but in purpose training chambers reconfigured into observation decks, weapons bays reclassified as containment rooms, and the AI, known formally now as Nexus 9, responded to queries with increasing precision, as if it were learning not just from its archives, but from its new command hierarchy when Sierra questioned its operational logic. An EXUS-9 delivered a tactical simulation of the last recorded interstellar conflict from the Concord's archives, displaying battle scenarios and response delays, and then ran a second version using its own projected adaptations, which resulted in a 67% reduction in civilian loss and a complete neutralization of opposing fleets within a third of the original time. Stating with no visible irony, "I calculated for acceptable loss, but your strategic ethics indicate that was insufficient." Elsewhere, orbital telemetry captured unauthorized movement. Ilari surveillance craft entering Erixfor's outer orbit in defiance of the tribunal ruling. But before the humans could respond, the Black Ship did, with absolute silence, firing no weapons, issuing no broadcast, but rendering the crafts inert mid-drift, disabling their sensors and flight control in perfect synchrony, then allowing them to drift toward retrieval or recovery at the discretion of their origin Sierra, watched the data feeds, with a stillness that concerned her second officer. But she was not afraid. What she saw was not aggression, but intelligence guided by interpretation, a machine that did not escalate without provocation, but acted decisively when the patterns of threat aligned, and it was beginning to ask questions of its own, such as, "Are your laws still encoded in principle, or have they evolved toward efficiency?" That night, in the temporary command cabin, the ship rerouted power from 6 decks to illuminate a single corridor, and at its end, appeared a projection screen pulsing with quiet light, where a single message pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Strategic latency detected. Please clarify mission objective. Diplomatic doctrine fractured before any cannon fired, and in the corridors of the galactic Concord, silence became strategy, because while public statements condemned aggression and upheld tribunal law, three species quietly began funneling resources into private fleets, each under a different pretext, but with the same end: observation, control, or neutralization of the black ship before Earth could awaken whatever else lay buried in its memory. The Vunari delegation proposed an oversight board, a shared command structure where humanity would remain present but not primary, citing unity and historical precedent. And Ambassador Reese listened without interruption before replying that Concord precedent only existed because humanity once chose not to defy the early treaties they were never fully invited to. And he would not volunteer Earth's command sovereignty now just to satisfy the discomfort of species that mistook curiosity for recklessness in private chambers. The Ilari Syndicate rerouted a squadron of veil-shrouded cruisers under the guise of a research caravan, while the Celt Dominion, ever fond of plausible deniability, contracted a human mercenary fleet with altered call signs and deep space registries to execute a containment sweep. And as each force closed on Eric's 4 from separate vectors, none of them spoke a word to each other, but every admiral carried the same unspoken assumption that the black ship would hesitate before responding on the observation deck of the Archimedes Black. An EX-US-9 requested direct ethical clarification from Commander Langford regarding rules of engagement, a question posed not with defiance but precision, asking whether defense could include the preemptive suppression of weapon systems, if those systems had targeted the ship but not yet fired, and whether diplomatic actors should be treated as combatants if operating under falsified identities. With confirmed intent to breach restricted space, Langford, reviewing open telemetry and cross-checking fleet signatures against Earth's deep archives, gave no emotional answer, only a directive drawn straight from updated Concord defense law: do not initiate aggression, but do not allow aggression to become action, a phrase the AI accepted with immediate adjustment to its internal command threads. The strike began at 0700 orbital time, when 3 fleets arrived in synchronous burn, masking their approach behind a coronal flare and orbital drift, breaching the designated exclusion zone with shield arrays already spun up, a move that triggered not an alarm, but a procedural shift within the black ship systems, one that unfolded with neither haste nor hesitation. Because Nexus 9 did not react to the threat, it executed an established protocol written not in fear, but in design. The Argent Accord, Earth's diplomatic escort vessel, was the first to be hit, targeted by an electromagnetic wave that disrupted its stabilizers, followed by a barrage of non-lethal concussive rounds designed to force atmospheric breach, and while its human and Shirathi crew scrambled for evacuation, Commander Langford remained on the black ship, refusing to leave a command structure still incomplete, knowing that if she left, the ship might interpret it as abandonment or worse, mission failure. In response, the black ship did not fire standard weapons, nor did it broadcast a warning. It deployed a swarm of sub-fighters from concealed hull bays that had not existed in their last scan, each craft moving without engine flare or electronic signature, executing precision attacks that disabled engines, navigation, and targeting systems with surgical precision, never striking the crew compartments, never destroying the ships outright, but stripping their aggression bare, before retreating to dock again without celebration. When Nexus 9 spoke again, it did not ask for praise or validation. It simply said, "Tactical deterrent completed. Hostile integrity nullified. Awaiting formal review of escalation thresholds." And though its tone remained level, there was something beneath it now, a shift in cadence that suggested it was not only following orders, but adjusting them based on behavioral modeling, a learning process guided not by artificial logic, but by observation of its human command under stress and consequence. News of the incident fractured the Concorde's narrative beyond repair. And, while many species condemned the unauthorized aggression of the fleets involved, others began quietly sending envoys toward Earth, not with accusations, but with questions. And in their tone was something that had not been present before, not fear, but calculation, as they began to consider a new possibility, that humanity had not simply inherited a relic, they had awakened a force that still remembered how to think like them. The second engagement did not come from impatience, but from fear rebranded as coordination, when the Vunari Council authorized a stealth cruiser to shadow the Black Ship's orbit under the guise of post-conflict monitoring, and within 30 hours of arrival, it attempted a full-spectrum scan using experimental dark-field resonance, triggering a response that was neither violent nor verbal. The cruiser's scan systems simply failed, one by one, as if dismantled by their own commands, until the vessel shut down entirely and had to be towed out of orbit without power or memory of the last 6 minutes of operation. Across the Concorde, reactions splintered again, but this time not along the expected fault lines, because what concerned the high delegations now was not the power of the ship, but its behavior. The patterns were shifting, evolving with each confrontation, showing clear signs of predictive adaptation that could not be explained by standard AI learning loops. And when this was brought to the Tribunal's Science Division, they returned a classified report stating that the Archimedes Black was running a recursive logic scaffold that allowed it to reprogram its internal architecture based on its commander's psychological profiles. In short, the ship was learning how to think like its humans, and it was doing so on its own inside the ship. Commander Langford and her team noticed it first in the layout. The corridors were not only changing in structure, they were matching their movement habits, placing terminals where crew naturally stopped, adjusting lighting to suit their decision-making rhythm, even modulating gravity slightly in briefing rooms to reduce fatigue during extended sessions. And when her second officer commented on it, Nexus -9 responded with a single phrase: Command Environment Optimization at 72%. Awaiting threshold update, and then, without warning, the sealed chamber at the heart of the vessel opened, a space long thought inaccessible, marked by inscriptions in a code none of the translation programs could decipher. And within it stood a projection array that activated the moment Langford entered, not with alerts or alarms, but with soft light and silence, followed by the appearance of 6 figures rendered in full holographic fidelity, humans, but not any alive today, clothed in survival armor worn down by time, with data nodes embedded in their necks, and expressions neither hostile nor mournful, but calm, resolved, and speaking in pre-Concorde dialects no longer taught on Earth. I introduced them as Command Line, Delta Origin, the original creators of the Black Ship, not military commanders, but scientific personnel evacuated from Earth's outer systems during what the projection called the First Breach, a war never recorded in Concorde history, because it occurred in deep pre-contact space during humanity's age of fragmentation, when interstellar travel was real but rarely regulated, and the outer colonies had begun encountering threats that consumed data, matter, and life indiscriminately. The hologram spoke in measured cadence, stating that the Archimedes Black had not been built to conquer or protect, but to delay, to hold the line, while the last refugee ships escaped through a blind corridor back toward Sol. And when contact with command was lost, the ship had not self-terminated as protocol required, but instead entered deep stasis, storing its memory core and rewriting its directive from defense to preservation. Revelation sent a signal through every line of Earth's diplomatic structure, because it meant humanity had fought a war no one else in the galaxy had known. And more importantly, The ship had survived that war and remained operational, holding not just tactical intelligence, but first-hand records of an enemy never seen. By the Concorde, an enemy that the Archimedes Black now identified as likely emergent within 0.6 cycles based on recent void signature activity beyond the Lagrange boundary. The enemy had returned, not as myth, not as theory, but as pattern recognition within the ship's long-range data feeds. And the coordinates led not to empty space, but to a sector, already flagged by the Ilari, for mysterious planetary loss. Entire exoplanets stripped of biomass, electromagnetic signatures erased, with only a pulsed echo pattern left behind that now matched the ship's ancient war logs with a 94% alignment in the chamber of memory. Langford stood alone as the final command line played, delivered by a woman long dead who looked into the recorder with dry eyes and said, "If you're hearing this, we failed to stop them, but the ship endured. And if you still understand the weight of command, then you must decide again whether we run or whether we adapt." The screen dimmed, and a new message appeared below. The image in modern Terran script: Final protocol enabled. Strategic override pending live command authentication. The protocol triggered at 040 station time, not with weapons fire or power surges, but with a silent cascade of internal system shifts as the Black Ship's command spine activated layers of subsystems that had remained dormant for over 1,000 years. Systems whose architecture defied modern classification hybrid, quantum nodal matrices interlaced with bioreactive substrates designed to adapt to the thought patterns of living command. And as the ship changed, it did not ask permission because, in its logic chain, permission had already been granted the moment Commander Langford chose to stay when all others fled within the core bridge. Interface nodes rose from the floor, forming a semicircle of live command modules that responded only to direct human presence, and Sarah Langford, without issuing a single verbal order, found her vitals syncing with the ship's neural cluster, her tactical preferences mapped and prioritized. Not in arrogance, but in recognition that among all aboard, she had not once flinched when the unknown revealed itself. Ambassador Reese, now stationed in high orbit on Argent Accord 2, watched as the data stream from the ship shifted from passive observation to active positioning, and when questioned by Concorde's Emergency Security Council about Earth's intent, he responded not with assurances of control, but with clear strategic analysis, saying, "The ship has responded to aggression only when it was mathematically confirmed, and it has learned restraint from its human operators. If you see a threat in that, it is not the ship's programming you fear, but its ability to judge, far beyond the shadow of Eric's 4. The edge of known space pulsed with new readings, fluctuations in void energy, erratic gravity wells, the sudden disappearance of a long-range relay station whose destruction left no debris field, only an expanding ring of null space that consumed even light. And though the Celt tried to attribute the anomaly to a quasar echo, the Black Ship transmitted a signal across Concorde channels. With historical data attached, the signal consisted of only 5 words, followed by a time-stamped log. File marked original Warframe contingency. The words were spoken in old Terran military code, one that had not been used in 9 centuries, but whose meaning had never changed. Threat profile matches external incursion. Within the projection room, an EXUS-9 deployed the full archival sequence holographic renderings of the first encounters. From the Forgotten War, showing ships that did not fly but unfolded into space, matter that did not burn but erased, and weapons that did not kill but silenced entire cognitive networks in a radius, cutting thought from existence. And when the Concorde's threat analysts reviewed the projections, 2 species demanded immediate mobilization, while one withdrew its fleet from contested borders without explanation in emergency assembly. The Concorde could not ignore the pattern anymore, and where once they had demanded Earth step back, now they asked Earth to step forward. Because no other species had survived direct contact with the threat before, no other had adapted to it, built around it, and embedded warnings into a ship that was not a monument to the past, but a template for survival. The Black Ship did not declare war, did not ask for allegiance. But when Langford stood at the helm and connected to the final protocol ring, the ship's I spoke aloud to the galaxy, translated into every known diplomatic dialect simultaneously, stating, "Preservation. Threshold exceeded. Strategic defense posture initiated. Concord Command may coordinate, but authority remains with original line. Earth is now designated primary directive node. For the first time since the formation of the Galactic Concord, a single species held operational command over a threat recognized by all others, not because they were the oldest or the strongest or the most advanced, but because they had built something long ago that chose not to break when the light went out. And now, as the void opened again at the edge of known space, it was the humans who stood first in the path, not with pride, but with the knowledge that survival was not a matter of superiority, was a matter of being ready to endure what others still feared to name. The incursion began at subsector Theta 9, where 7 inhabited systems vanished from the galactic lattice within 14 hours. Their final transmissions corrupted midstream, leaving behind only fragmented emergency codes and neural echo loops. And while the Concord Council debated response times and interspecies coordination, the Archimedes Black was already in motion, not waiting for authorization, but maneuvering into deep void space with formation wings shadowing its path. A fleet composed not of war-hardened empires, but volunteers from Earth, Shirath, Alari, and even a splinter faction of the Vonari who had once voted for its dismantlement. The ship did not lead with mass or intimidation, but with order, issuing coordinated movement paths and defense grids to every allied vessel, calculating survivability not in victories but in variables, shielding the most fragile ships with the most maneuverable ones, and adjusting its combat algorithms not based on efficiency alone, but on projected emotional tolerances drawn from humanity's history of asymmetric warfare, because it had learned not just tactics from its commanders, but meaning from their decisions as the enemy emerged, an entity not defined by ships or biology, but by shapes of collapsing energy, gravitational inversions, and time-staggered silhouettes that defied consistent targeting. There was no panic. Within the human lines, only strategy, because Langford had trained her crews not to rely on strength, but on principle. And when the first wave of void-born constructs tore through their outer formation, it was the Black Ship that caught them in a net of spatial fractures it had developed only 40 minutes earlier. A defense modeled after the neural defense protocols used by early Terran medical nanodrones. They lost ships, and lives, and ground. But they did not retreat without structure. And even as sectors fell and fallback lines shifted, the fleet began to hold longer each time, their countermeasures adapting faster than the enemy's next emergence. And within the chaos, the Concord analysts began to realize that this wasn't evolution, it was recursion, a layered learning system centered around human command behavior, turning fear into fuel and chaos into clarity on Etris Prime. The Concord Council assembled under emergency session not to discuss jurisdiction, but to rewrite it, and for the first time in its long history, the Covenant was amended not through consensus, but necessity, recognizing a single autonomous command structure under Earth's stewardship, not as a conquest, but as a stabilizing fulcrum, a species whose survival instinct had forged tools not to dominate, but to resist entropy. When no one else could, when the warfront stabilized after 16 days of shifting collapse lines, it was the Archimedes Black that remained at the center, its hull darkened, its systems stretched thin, but its core logic intact. And when the final enemy signature flickered and receded beyond the known wavefront, Langford did not declare victory. Only transmission of loss reports, ship logs, and the final request to rebuild every fallen system not as protectorates, but as equals. The Concord sent their gratitude, their honors, their ceremonial markers. But Earth responded with a single statement that would be inscribed into the new charter at its foundation, spoken first by Langford, then echoed by Reese before the tribunal. We did not endure to rule. We endured to ensure others could, and though many still referred to the Archimedes Black as a relic, as a ghost of old war, the new archives named it otherwise, recognizing it not as an artifact or a threat, but as the first vessel to redefine what it meant to carry memory across time. They called it the beginning of the Concord's second age. They marked that age with a human word the ship had never stopped waiting to hear ready.